G'day mate, 40 here. So you're going to hear stories that I've been over boundary, that I've abused my powers as this live streamer who corrupts the souls of the youth, damages people's souls, that I may have held on to a hug a little too long. You need to understand, I'm just a very warm person. All right? So I'm no longer the austere, stiff upper lip, remote, repressed, Anglo-Saxon Seventh-day Adventist that I was raised at. And now I've joined a different culture. Now I'm Jewish. I'm very warm. I'm just very expressive. I just love people. I'm a toucher. I love to celebrate people. I just can't stand back and just let the world spin on its axis. I'm demonstrative. I'm affectionate. I'm just a very warm person. So some people are going to say, "Oh, that's inappropriate. Oh, 40, you went too far there. Oh, 40, you shouldn't have laid your hands on there." But I think most people will tell you that my touch is much more beneficent than exploratory. Like, how can I just stand back and be uninvolved when I see all the suffering in the world? Like, I'm moved. I'm a very warm person. I see pain and I want to heal it. I see suffering and I want to ease it. I see distress and I want to calm it. I see unnecessary muscular compression and I want to ease it. I see people pulling down when they should be letting up and going up. I see people contorting when I'd love to see them expanding. I see people with these weird interfering tension patterns. Like, how can I, as a man so attuned to how the physiology of the human being works, how can I just stand by? All right, I want to lay on hands. I want to bring the healing, bro. And so you're going to say, "Oh, 40, hey, you brought healing a little too intensely there. You're doing a little too much healing. Maybe that person didn't solicit the healing. So I've made some mistakes, but it came from a place of love, bro. These mistakes came from a place of love. I'm just a very warm person." Okay, so I was watching this Mike Fisher video. He was ranting about Skip Bayless, saying what a horrible man Skip Bayless is. And Troy Aikman, Fox football analyst and former Dallas Cowboy championship quarterback, also said how very disappointed he was that Fox had hired Skip Bayless to do the morning show Undisputed. And they both made the bogus accusation that Skip Bayless, in his book on the 1995 championship Cowboys team, had falsely accused Troy Aikman of being gay. And it's not true. There's a chapter in it where Skip simply mentions how widespread the rumors were around the Dallas Cowboys that Troy was gay. But he made very clear in the book that he knew of no evidence that this was true. He was just shocked that Barry Switzer, the coach, seemed to believe that Troy was gay, or at least was hearing those rumors. So there comes a point where the accurate reporting of rumors is good journalism, is necessary to understand what's going on. Particularly if you put the rumors in context, say, I know of no factual evidence for them, but all these people in the Dallas Cowboys organization seem to believe that Troy was gay. So there's a night and day difference between the accurate reporting of a rumor and pointing out that there's no factual evidence for it and making the allegation of the rumor. And so I just thought this Mike Fisher video blasting Skip Bayless was bogus on that account. So that led me to getting into a discussion with a friend. What are journalistic ethics? And journalistic ethics are not like the ethics for doctors or the ethics for lawyers, because the ethical obligations, to whom do you owe your obligations, they're so varied for journalists. So as a journalist, do you primarily owe ethical obligations to your readers? Do you primarily owe ethical obligations to your sources of information? Do you primarily owe ethical obligations to the people you write about? Do you primarily owe ethical obligations to your profession? Because journalists depend very heavily on cooperation from the general public. Do you primarily owe ethical obligations to your employer, to your advertisers? Right? There's so many competing ethical obligations, and it's not at all clear to whom journalists owe their primary obligation. So that makes journalistic ethics quite unlike the ethical codes of other professions. So, for example, it's pretty clear that the doctor's primary ethical obligation is to his patients. And an attorney's primary ethical obligation is to his client and to the legal system, but primarily to the client. And an accountant's primary ethical obligation is to the general public, particularly, say, investors, potential investors, those who might be affected by, who are relying on the accountant doing an honest job. And dentists, obviously, their primary ethical obligation is to the patient. But dentists, that's interesting. So many dentists push things that are bogus, right? There's so many dentists abusing the trust of their patients. Is there any medical profession that so often abuses their clients, their patients, as dentists? Like, so much of what dentists recommend is bogus. They're just doing it to get money from their patients. For example, there's no empirical evidence that flossing does any good. So many dental procedures are, unnecessary. All they do is line the dentist's pockets. So there was a great article in the Atlantic about how off the hook dangerous dentists are with their just lack of ethical behavior, getting people to have unnecessary root canals, all sorts of painful, expensive surgeries that line the dentist's pockets but do the patient no good. So really watch out for your dentists. And mechanics, car mechanics. So I don't know. I just don't know anything about the workings of the automobile, so I often fear car mechanics. I don't know how often they've taken advantage of me. I mean, they may well have stolen thousands of dollars from me. So the primary ethical obligation for the car mechanic is to the client, but then also to the state. For example, if we have laws about emissions, right? There are many people who do emissions and they help people cheat the standard, and the result is we all suffer from decreased air quality. But yearly joy x-ray is $120. Yeah, be highly skeptical of what your dentist suggests you spend, because just abuse is just rampant, and the profession hasn't demonstrated much interest in curtailing it. So there are all sorts of professions that exist primarily for the benefit of the profession, not for the public, and have no interest in curtailing abuse. I mean, think about mortgage brokers and mortgage lending, right? They have you sign such complicated, lengthy documents that there's no reason to expect an ordinary person can understand what's going on. There's so many fees that you're not really cognizant of. So it's clearly a profession where they have aligned a complicated way of doing things so that they can screw you over to the max. But journalistic ethics. So I think in general, in matters like journalistic ethics, the most important thing is, as long as you know the name of the person who's committing the work of journalism, then they are going to, almost all ethical questions will sort themselves out, because the most important capital you have as a journalist is your reputation. So if you get a reputation for misquoting people, people aren't going to want to talk to you. If you get a reputation for being unfair, people won't want to deal with you, people won't give you information. So as a journalist, you largely depend on other people cooperating, giving you information on or off the record, giving you interviews. So you very quickly develop a reputation, like how fair are you, how committed are you to accuracy, and do you make an honest effort to show different sides to a story, right? So depending on how well you do on those measures, it's going to affect how the people cooperate with you. So as long as your name's on your work, your ethics is just going to sort itself out, right? Because if you show yourself to be a bad character, people are going to shun you. Now, in journalism, generally speaking, journalists are most concerned about their reputation with their peers, with other journalists. So they probably socialize mainly with other journalists. They want to look good to other journalists. And so that gives them an incentive to operate by the standards of their profession. Also provides a tremendous incentive for groupthink. I remember I got called by a CNN booker in 2007 because I was the guy who broke the story about the mayor of Los Angeles. He'd stopped wearing his wedding ring. He'd been having an affair with a newsreader on a Spanish language TV station that covered him. And I broke that story. So CNN wanted to bring me on the show live. So they sent a limo to pick me up at 4 a.m. And I got into the CNN Los Angeles studio on Sunset Boulevard about 4:30 a.m. and then they said, "Oh, we're moving the interview back till it's not going to be live; it's going to be taped." And when we do the taped interview, I didn't get to see the woman anchor who was asking me the questions. That's by design, so that you're kind of on a defensive. And I noted that it was well known among journalists that for many months the mayor had not been wearing his wedding ring, but that journalists were reluctant for various reasons to report on the mayor's dissolving marriage, because they wanted to support the first Latino mayor of Los Angeles in over a century, that they generally agreed with his politics, and so they were protective of Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. And the CNN anchor said, "How can you say this about Los Angeles Times? They've won Pulitzer Prizes." Well, I responded, Pulitzer Prize does not denote journalistic excellence. It's a popularity contest with other journalists. So New York Times journalists who lied for Stalin and covered up the Holodomor, the Ukrainian genocide, he got a Pulitzer Prize. You had, Janet Cook of the Washington Post, who invented a story about drug addict kids who were born with drug addictions and stuff. just complete fabulism, just completely invented the story, and she won a Pulitzer Prize. So also lots of other like really long, boring stories with very little public importance have won Pulitzer Prizes because they've hit the sweet spot of what the profession regards as important, what it should support. To a large extent, Pulitzer Prizes are a popularity contest. So CNN did not end up using any of my interview, to the best of my knowledge. So I got up at like 3:30 a.m. for no reason, go in, because they didn't want to hear me criticize other journalists. They didn't want to hear me point out that other journalists were aware of the same story I was, but that the journalistic profession in Los Angeles had covered up for the mayor over the previous 6 to 9 months, because they didn't want to break any embarrassing story about the mayor's marriage. Okay, so what are the things that you can do as a journalist that will pretty much end your career? So plagiarism, depending on the extent of it, and depending on how it balances up with your body of work. Like, say, one small instance in a long, proud history of journalism would not be as devastating as one small instance in someone just starting out in the profession. But generally speaking, credible accusation of plagiarism will, generally speaking, end a career. Any example of inventing something, like inventing words, putting words in someone's mouth, inventing that you're out of place or something, like pure invention, that will generally end your career. Taking a hidden bribe. So if you're a lobbyist for the tobacco industry and you publish an op-ed in the New York Times, as long as you disclose that you're a lobbyist for the tobacco industry and that's relevant to your op-ed, that's fine. But there are journalists who place freelance pieces. They might get paid $100 by the publication in question, say perhaps the Los Angeles Times, but then they'll get $1,000 kickback from the industry who supports what they've written. So that came to light. That's a career killer. So I know a publicist fairly well who rewards journalists who write op-eds that favor industries that employ him. So that stuff comes to light. That's a career killer. Okay, what if you're just nasty? What if you just call up people and you scream at them? That's not usually going to end your career. What if you're unfair? What if your writing is habitually slanted to the left or to the right or in favor of this industry? That's because there's so much subjectivity with that. That's not going to end your career. What are the other no-nos for journalistic ethics? So you can't invent stuff, you can't take secret bribes, you can't plagiarize. And I think that's about it. So obviously your main capital as a journalist is your reputation. So if you were writing stories in February 2020 saying that COVID was going to be no big deal, then your reputation is going to take a big hit. If you've written stories based on academic studies that prove to be bogus, your reputation is going to take a big hit. If, like Judy Miller at the New York Times, she was posting all sorts of stories, along with most of the big-time journalists, about the coming war with Iraq prior to 2003. And she was relying on administration sources, making the case that Iraq had all these weapons of mass destruction, and it turned out that was totally bogus. So the journalists who participated in that often took a hit, but interestingly the op-ed columnists who made the case for invading Iraq in 2003, virtually none of them suffered any career setback. But these are the op-ed guys, they're paid to give their opinion. So Jeffrey Goldberg, he's the editor of The Atlantic. He didn't take a hit for his bogus promotion of the 2003 Iraq invasion, nor did virtually all the commentariat, virtually all the big name pundits supported the 2003 invasion of Iraq, whether they're on the left, the right, or the center. And I can't think of any Charles Krauthammer who suffered professional losses as a result of being completely wrong on this incredibly important story that ended up costing the United States about $5 trillion, not to mention thousands of lives, and proved to be an absolute disaster. Okay, who suffered a hit for Russia hoax promotion? I am not aware of anyone suffering a hit for Russia hoax promotion. So, generally speaking, the elite journalists were more careful than the story as it's been understood in the general public. So, among regular people, say on the left, millions and millions of them believe that there was substantial evidence provided that Russia had hacked voting machines and changed votes from Hillary to Trump, and this cost Hillary the 2016 election. Right? New York Times, Washington Post, the elite journalists, to the best of my knowledge, never alleged that, and there's absolutely no evidence that that occurred. But regular people, that was their takeaway from their reporting of ties between Trump and Russia. Or Russia did make genuine disinformation efforts, but it was incredibly minor league. So this was the dominant story in the United States for 2 years? And the importance of this story was minimal. It's like it wouldn't even be in the top 100 important things that happened in the United States during those 2 years, and yet it was the number one story on the mainstream media's agenda. So, does one pay a price for hyping something as important when it turns out to be unimportant? Not generally speaking, not that I know of. So, these massive errors in judgment, or what's essentially a political campaign. So, Steve Saylor has an op-ed today, or a column in Takis Mag on the new movie Mank. And he talks about how journalists today are essentially publicity agents for the conventional wisdom, and that they tend to be killjoys who tell us how we should feel and how we should think. And they're essentially just repeating the conventional wisdom and enforcing it. Dean Baquet seems to have been rewarded for pushing it. Well, he was editor prior to pushing it. He's editor now. Certainly hasn't paid any price. And he admitted, I think in 2019, in a speech or a memo to staff, that as the pushing the Russia collusion hoax didn't bring down Trump, now they were switching to the 1619 racial angle. That was going to be their new thing to try to take down Trump. But these are matters of political judgment. New York Times stock at 5 years highs. Right. Oh, damn. I hate it when I do that. I completely blow the perspective. Okay, so come on, man. Right. So, yeah, journalists don't generally pay a price for political activism, as long as their political activism fits in with the worldview of the reigning elites. So the New York Times found that there was the most money to be made and subscriptions to be gained from fervent opinion pieces about how horrible Trump was. So the New York Times has moved from an primarily advertising-based publication where you're rewarded for getting hits to a subscription model where you're rewarded for reinforcing the worldview of subscribers. So newspapers and TV channels are also a business. So just like Fox, they tap into an audience by largely telling the audience what they want to hear. So too, the New York Times has found its business model in telling its audience what it wants to hear, rather than what may actually be true. And then, yeah, the right stuff. Again, their business model is that they tell people what they want to hear. They give people arguments for what they want to believe, and you get regular reinforcement when you tune into the right stuff or the New York Times or Fox News. You will tend to get regular reinforcement for your view. That's the winning business model, is that people have a particular view of the world and they want to be able to tune in to you and get that view of the world reinforced and possibly reinterpreted, extended into new areas of life people may not be aware of, find them new arguments, possibly new evidence for the worldview that they want to hold. While good reporting and journalism is often going to tell people what they don't want to hear. So, if you have any challenges on what are journalistic ethics, I'd love to read them. But there's a fascinating op-ed in the New York Times by a guy who's left of center, but always interesting. I'm blanking on his name, but this latest one is on the role of status. So I agree with Tom Wolfe that after the need for air and food and shelter and clothing, basically the strongest human desire, the most powerful human desire, is the desire for status. So status simply means the opposite of humiliation. So instead of going to work and the boss saying to you, "Hey, Dick Sniff, bring me a cup of coffee," the boss says, "Hey, can you come into my office? And what do you think about this? Love to get your opinion on this." Or you have people who want to know your opinion or respect you or treat you with, say, some deference. So desire for status has a huge effect on our political opinions. Generally speaking, people are going to subscribe to the politics that fits in with the crowd that they want to belong to. So if you're an Orthodox Jew, traditional Orthodox Jew, you're going to want to subscribe to a politics that fits in with the generally conservative political worldview of Orthodox Jews. If you're in the news media, you're going to want to subscribe to a politics that fits in with the worldview of your peers. And if people find navigating today's complex social reality, trying to get status in America in 2020 is just too frustrating, it's too repellent to say one's own moral standards, then you might make rejection of traditional forms of status in America in 2020. You might make that a key part of your worldview. So you reject what our ruling elites believe is true, and you develop status in an alternative world. So you might get status by developing great memes, or by donating generously with super chats, or by organizing or attending conferences, or by promoting what the mainstream media tells you are conspiracy theories. Right, so is there any more dramatic way to oppose everything that is held sacred in the Western world in 2020 than, say, by denying the Holocaust? Like, if you deny the Holocaust, then you are completely giving up all options for status in the mainstream world, and you are making a dramatic play for status in the alternative dissident world. So if you say COVID is a hoax, Holocaust is a hoax, then you're rejecting status in the mainstream world, and you are vying for status in the alternative world. Any comment on Brendan O'Connell? No, he just seems like an eccentric character, and that's all I have on him. So I really want to think more about the role of status, how it affects. Let me scroll through the chat here. Seems like American individualism as opposed to status. No, American individualism is the pursuit of a particular kind of status. It's a different status than a collectivist society has in, say, Japan or Russia. So, is it antisocial not to want status, or even to want the opposite? Okay, I don't believe that there's anyone who doesn't want status. Yeah, it does seem antisocial. It seems anti-human. Because what you're saying, if you don't want status, what you're saying is really that you're fine with humiliation, which is incredibly dangerous to your well-being. It's incredibly dangerous to your health. It's incredibly dangerous to your survival. And if you don't want status, then you're reducing your ability to form bonds with people, because nobody wants to be bonded to someone who is just continually being humiliated. Someone who is a walking, talking humiliation. What kind of person will want to bond with such a person? Only a fellow loser. Now, mainstream journalists suffered a reputational hit among their peers for poo-pooing early right-wing alarm about the China flu. Right. So there were journalists who were proved wrong in with regard to COVID, and they knocked down talk about the dangers of. Well, they did get humiliated. They got roundly humiliated on social media. So there are all sorts of people in January, February who said, COVID's no big deal, and then they have been roundly humiliated on social media. But the status that they most want is with their peers. Status is equated with humiliation. No. Status is the opposite of humiliation. Right? Status, people are nice to you. When you're a repeatedly humiliated person, people shun you and treat you badly. Higher status also undergo a sort of humiliation with paparazzi. There's an element of humiliation, but it's much more about status. I'm a soldier, I follow orders. Status isn't exhibitionism, depends on what sphere of life you're talking about. In some spheres of life, status does have an element of humiliation. New York Times ideal customer is suburban mom, aspirational elite. I hate the hot take chase, and yet you're going to tune into people who have a hot take who may have a hot take that you're interested in. Yeah, playing to your audience is a very good business model. Having contempt for your audience tends to be a bad business model. Dean Baquet seems to have been rewarded for pushing the Russia collusion hoax. Elliot wants a complex cultural performance. Yeah, so people who get tired trying to provide a complex cultural performance that gets rewarded in 2020 America, they then seek out an alternative, right? They seek out an alternative world to dominate. Luke has contempt for his Trump supporting audience. I have contempt for believing that the evidence we have seen so far, evidence of which I'm aware, is compelling case for voter fraud. So there's probably lots of evidence of which I'm not aware or I don't understand the import. So I presume that pretty much everybody in the chat, they have contempt for seeking status in 2020 America, in conventional 2020 America. So therefore, we're all inhabiting, and see it's Hanukkah coming up, there's a nice Hanukkah top of that vehicle. So we're all inhabiting a dissident world where you get status, in large part commensurate with your rejection of mainstream America 2020 status. So we formed an alternative universe, and part of the markers of status in this alternative universe is rejecting the markers of status in the conventional world of America. And if conventional America tells us that COVID is a very serious threat, then a lot of people in the distant world say, "Oh, that's a hoax, man." Okay, Tom Girardi, a Catholic and Jesuit, is probably the most important lawyer in the USA. Tom and Erica Jane, a high status housewives of Beverly Hills on Bravo, Kardashian, Caitlyn Jenner. You know I am right. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, but so what? I don't have your obsession. Some people are just stupid. Yeah, but even low IQ people, they still want to be treated well, right? The desire for status is simply the desire to be treated well, right? And it's the desire to avoid being treated badly. It's the desire to avoid being hurt. Oh, to get high status these days, it's about the depths of depravity. Well, in some areas of life, high status involves depravity, but there are plenty of people with high status in 2020 America who are not into depravity. But that is definitely the dissident alternative point of view, is that people with status in the normal world are depraved. I feel no moral responsibility to follow orders, unit performance, and rank is my measure of status. Yeah, but you don't spend your whole time in the armed forces. So you also have family, and you have friends from childhood, and you don't want them to treat you badly. People think, wait, let's see here. Tucker Carlson, have you not heard of Tucker's traps? No, I've not been keeping up with Tucker. Right, the bow tie is a gay cultural calling card, if you say so. People think because the government lied about the migrant crisis, they also lie about COVID. There's also this irrational desire to have freedom, not wear. Yeah, that's not wearing a mask is also trying to gain status in an alternative world. I feel no moral responsibility for following orders. That unit performance and rank is my measure of status. Yeah, but you also have a life outside of your armed services. So need to develop some stronger, more clear thoughts on the role of status in our political choices, and whether or not we embrace a certain worldview or a perspective, or what could be called a conspiracy theory.